It was past midnight in Chicago and the rain hadn't let up all evening. The kind of rain that doesn't just fall, it slants sideways, stings your face, and soaks through your coat no matter how tightly you zip it. Inside County General Hospital's emergency room, the usual late-night rhythm played out. Beeping monitors, hushed voices, the occasional groan from a patient on a gurney. Flu season was winding down, but the city never really slept, and neither did the ER. Elena had been a nurse here for 12 years. She knew the drill better than most. When to move fast, when to hold still, when to speak softly, and when to raise her voice. She wasn't flashy. She didn't wear scrubs with cartoon characters or post selfies in the break room. She just showed up, did her job, and stayed until the job was done. That night, she was wrapping up paperwork at the nurse's station, coffee gone cold in her mug, when her phone rang. It wasn't her personal phone. It was the ER's secondary line, the one used for field calls from paramedics, police, or sometimes concerned strangers. She picked it up, expecting a routine transfer update. County General ER, this is Nurse Elena. The voice on the other end was shaky, breathless, like the person had just run a block in the rain. Ma'am, I don't know what to do. There's a girl. She's just lying here, on the sidewalk, near the Grand Meridian Hotel. She's not moving. Elena sat up straighter. Is she breathing? I think so. But she's real pale, and her eyes are open, but she's not responding. She's barefoot, in a dress. It's all torn. Okay, Elena said, calm now, pen already in hand. Stay with her. Don't move her unless she's in danger. I'm calling an ambulance right now. I already did. They said 10 minutes, but she looks bad. Really bad. Elena's mind raced. 10 minutes could be an eternity if someone was crashing. What's your name? Tom. I work at the coffee shop across the street. I was closing up and saw her stumble out of the hotel lobby, then just collapse. Good. Tom, stay on the line with me. Keep talking to her, even if she doesn't answer. She hit the intercom button with her shoulder while keeping Tom on the line. Code Blue Assist. Possible unconscious female outside Grand Meridian Hotel. Ambulance en route, but we need a trauma team ready on arrival. Then she turned back to Tom. Keep her warm if you can. Use your coat. And tell me, did you see anyone with her? No, she was alone. But wait, a pause. Rain crackled in the background. Her phone's in her hand. It's still on. Screen's lit up. Can you see anything on it? Any emergency contact? Tom hesitated. I don't want to snoop. It's okay. This is life or death. Just look for ice in case of emergency or someone labeled mom or dad. A few seconds passed. Then there's one. It just says dad, but the number's got a 312 area code. Local. Call it, Elena said quickly. Put it on speaker. I'll stay with you. Tom fumbled with the phone. Elena heard the dial tone, then ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. She held her breath. On the 5th ring, a man answered. His voice was rough, groggy, clearly woken from sleep. Hello? Sir? Tom stammered. I'm sorry to call so late, but... Your daughter. Who is this? The man's tone sharpened instantly. I'm just a guy on the street. Your daughter's lying unconscious outside the Grand Meridian. She's not waking up. Silence. Then sharply, which daughter? She's young. Early 20s. Long dark hair. Wearing a blue dress. Another pause, longer this time. Elena could almost hear the man's mind working. Then quietly, urgently, is she breathing? Yes, I think so. Don't hang up. I'm coming. The line went dead. Elena exchanged a look with Tom over the phone. He's coming? I think so, Tom said, sounding stunned. He didn't even ask for the address. Within minutes, the ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed the young woman into the ER on a backboard, oxygen mask already in place. She was ice cold to the touch, pupils sluggish, pulse thready. No ID, no wallet. Just that phone still clutched in her limp hand. Elena took charge. Get her vitals. Start warming blankets. Run tox screen, full metabolic panel, head CT, and someone find out who that dad is. While the team worked, Elena gently pried the phone from the girl's fingers. The screen was cracked but still functional. She didn't unlock it, she didn't need to. The last call was still visible. Dad, Jonathan Thorne. The name meant nothing to her at first, but one of the younger techs overhearing froze. Wait, Jonathan Thorne? Like the Jonathan Thorne? Elena frowned. Who's that? The guy who founded Viridian Dynamics? The AI company? He's like a billionaire. Super private. Barely ever seen in public, Elena blinked. You're sure? The tech pulled out his own phone, typed something fast, and turned the screen toward her. There it was. A grainy photo from a tech conference 5 years ago. A tall man in a dark suit, sharp jawline, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. Jonathan Thorne. Net worth estimated at $8.3 billion, her stomach dropped. This wasn't just some runaway kid. This was the daughter of one of the richest, most powerful men in the country, and she'd been found alone, half-dressed, unconscious on a rainy sidewalk. Elena looked back at the girl, now hooked to monitors, chest rising and falling too fast, too shallow. She looked fragile, scared even in sleep. Nothing about her screamed billionaire's daughter. She looked like any other young woman who'd gotten in over her head. But Elena knew better than to assume. Rich or poor, scared was scared. Hurt was hurt. And right now this girl needed help, not headlines. Still, she couldn't ignore the call she'd overheard. The father had sounded shaken. Not angry, not dismissive. Shaken. And he'd said he was coming. Elena made a decision. She picked up the hospital phone again, dialed the number from the girl's call log, and waited. It rang once. Twice. A voice answered. Same rough tone, but now wide awake. Tense. Yes? Elena took a breath. Mr. Thorne? This is Nurse Elena Martinez at County General Hospital. Your daughter is here with us, a sharp inhale. Is she? She's stable for now, but she's unconscious. We're running tests. We don't know what happened yet. Another pause. Then quieter. What's her condition? Low body temperature, signs of possible dehydration, and we're concerned about drug involvement. But we won't know until labs come back. She had no identification, so we used her phone to reach you. I'm 10 minutes away, he said. Don't let anyone near her. Not press. Not staff who don't need to be there, just keep her safe. We always do, sir, Elena said firmly. But I need to ask, has she had any medical issues? Mental health history? Allergies? She's healthy, or... She was. His voice cracked slightly. We haven't spoken in almost 2 years. Elena didn't ask why, not then. She just said, okay, we'll be ready. She hung up and turned to the team. Family en route, high profile, lockdown access. Only essential personnel in Trauma Bay 3. As they prepped, Elena stood by the girl's bedside, adjusting the IV line. She smoothed a strand of wet hair from the girl's forehead. You're safe now, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Rain drummed against the windows. The ER buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, but in that one room time seemed to slow. 10 minutes later, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the ambulance bay. No entourage. No bodyguards. Just one man in a rumpled sweater and slippers, sprinting through the rain like his world depended on it. He burst through the ER doors, hair soaked, eyes wild. Where is she? Elena stepped forward. Mr. Thorne? He nodded, breathless. She's this way. She led him down the hall past gurneys and nurses and the hum of machines. He didn't look left or right. His entire focus was ahead. When they reached the room, he stopped short in the doorway. For a long moment, he just stared at his daughter, pale, connected to tubes so small in the hospital bed. Then his shoulders slumped, and he leaned against the doorframe like his legs might give out. Elena gave him space. She didn't offer platitudes. Didn't say she'll be okay. She just stood quietly, watching a father see his child broken in a way no parent should ever have to witness. Finally, he stepped inside, pulled up a chair, and took his daughter's hand. His voice was barely a whisper. Ava, I'm here. Elena lingered just outside the curtain, listening to the quiet sobs that followed. She didn't need to hear the whole story to know this wasn't just an accident. Something had gone very wrong. And as the night wore on, with tests coming back inconclusive and Ava still unresponsive, Elena made a silent promise. Not to the billionaire, but to the girl. She'd find out what happened. Not for the headlines, not for the money, but because every person who walks through those ER doors deserves to be seen, to be believed, to be fought for, even if they're wearing a torn designer dress and their father's name is on the cover of Forbes. The rain kept falling. Somewhere in the city, someone knew what really happened to Ava Thorne, and Elena intended to make sure that truth didn't stay hidden for long. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft hiss of oxygen flowing through the tubes. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the city damp and gray in the early morning light. Jonathan Thorne hadn't moved from the chair beside the bed since he'd arrived. He still wore the same clothes, sweater wrinkled, slippers soaked through, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes stayed locked on his daughter's face, as if willing her to wake up just by looking hard enough. Elena checked in quietly every hour, not wanting to intrude but needing to make sure he was okay too. She'd seen grief before, raw, messy, overwhelming, but this was different. This wasn't just sadness. It was guilt, regret, a kind of quiet panic that clung to him like smoke. On her third pass, she brought him a cup of hot coffee and a blanket. He looked up, startled, like he'd forgotten anyone else existed. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. He took the coffee but didn't drink it, just held it like it was something to hold on to. "She's stable," Elena said gently. "Her vitals are improving. Body temperature's back to normal. We're waiting on the toxicology results, but so far nothing points to a major overdose." He nodded slowly. "She wouldn't do that, Ava. She's not like that." Elena didn't argue. She'd learned long ago not to assume what people would or wouldn't do, especially when they were hurting. But she could hear the ache in his voice. This wasn't just denial, it was love, buried under years of silence. "She hasn't spoken to me in almost 2 years," he said suddenly, as if the words had been stuck in his throat and finally forced their way out. Not a call, not a text, nothing. Elena pulled up a second chair and sat, giving him space but letting him know she was listening. "It started after her mother died," he went on, staring at his daughter's hand in his. "Cancer, fast and brutal. Ava was 16. I shut down, threw myself into work. Thought if I kept building, kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel it. But she needed me, and I wasn't there." He paused, swallowed hard. "Then she got into Stanford. Full scholarship. Art history, of all things. I wanted her to study engineering, business, something practical. We fought. I said things. Stupid, proud things. Told her she was wasting her potential. That art wouldn't pay the bills." His voice cracked. "She looked at me like I was a stranger. Said, 'You never even asked what I love. You just assumed it wasn't enough.' And then she left. Changed her number. Blocked me everywhere. I hired people to check on her, discreetly. Made sure she had a safety net. But she refused every cent. Lived in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. Worked at a coffee shop. Taught art to kids after school." Elena listened, heart heavy. She'd seen this kind of story too many times. Parents and children loving each other fiercely but speaking different languages. One says, "I want you to be safe." The other hears, "I don't trust you to choose your own life." She was happy, Jonathan said, almost to himself. "My investigator sent photos once in a while." She smiled in them. Real smiles. Not the polite ones she used to give me at galas. He looked up at Elena. Why would she be here? In Chicago? She hated this city. Said it reminded her of everything she ran from. Elena didn't have an answer, but she remembered what the witness, Tom from the coffee shop, had said. Ava had come out of the Grand Meridian Hotel, a place far too expensive for someone living paycheck to paycheck. Later that morning, security footage arrived. The hospital had worked with the hotel to get access. Elena and Jonathan watched it together in a small conference room down the hall. The video showed Ava stepping out of a cab just before 11 p.m. She wore a deep blue dress, elegant, simple, and heels she kept slipping out of. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder more than once. Then a man approached. Late 30s, well-dressed, holding 2 glasses of champagne. They talked for a minute. She hesitated, then took one. They clinked glasses, smiled, walked toward the hotel entrance together. "Who is that?" Jonathan asked, leaning forward. "We don't know yet," Elena said, "but he's not on the hotel's guest list, and he wasn't with her when she collapsed." The next clip showed her stumbling out alone 20 minutes later, disoriented, clutching her head. She made it halfway down the block before her legs gave out. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. She didn't go there for a date. She wouldn't. Maybe it was work? Elena suggested. An art show? A meeting? Jonathan shook his head. She wouldn't wear that dress just for a meeting. And she never drank champagne. Said it gave her headaches. Something didn't add up. Back in the room, Ava stirred slightly. Her fingers twitched. Jonathan was at her side instantly. "Ava, can you hear me?" No response. But her eyelids fluttered, just for a second. Elena checked the monitors. She's coming out of it. Slowly. Her brain activity is increasing. Hope flickered in Jonathan's eyes for the first time since he'd walked in. Over the next few hours, the pieces started to shift. The toxicology report came back, no illegal drugs. No alcohol above legal limits. But there was something odd, a trace of a sedative not commonly used in the U.S., one usually found in veterinary medicine or overseas clinics. Strong, fast-acting. Could cause confusion, dizziness, even temporary paralysis if mixed with alcohol. Someone slipped or something, Jonathan said. Voice low and dangerous, Elena nodded. Looks that way, but why? And who? Then came the bank alert. Jonathan had authorized a trace on Ava's accounts as soon as she was admitted. A notification popped up on his phone. $2,500 withdrawn from savings yesterday afternoon. All funds depleted. She didn't do that, he said immediately. She kept that account for emergencies. She'd never empty it like that. Elena's mind raced. If someone knew about the account, if they'd tricked her or forced her. She called the bank, verified the withdrawal was made in person, at a branch 3 blocks from the hotel. Security footage showed Ava, yes, but she looked dazed, moving slowly like she was being guided. A man stood just behind her, out of camera range, but his hand hovered near her elbow. Not a date, not a friend, a setup. Jonathan paced the hallway like a caged animal. I have enemies. Business rivals, people who'd love to hurt me by hurting her. But she's been off the grid, Elena pointed out. How would they even find her? Maybe she reached out to someone, he said. Maybe she was trying to reconnect. And someone used that. The thought hung in the air, heavy and awful. Later that afternoon, a police detective arrived, Detective Ruiz, calm, no nonsense, with tired eyes and a notebook that never left her hand. She listened to everything, the call, the footage, the bank withdrawal, the sedative. She's lucky to be alive, Ruiz said. That drug can stop your breathing if the dose is wrong. Whoever gave it to her either didn't care, or didn't know how strong it was. Jonathan's face went pale. Find them. We will, Ruiz said. But I need to ask, has your daughter ever been involved in anything? Sensitive? Corporate secrets? Private data? Anything someone might want? Jonathan hesitated. Then slowly he nodded. Viridian's launching a new AI ethics platform next month. It's designed to audit algorithms for bias, race, gender, income. Big tech companies hate it. Some have threatened lawsuits, others, less legal tactics. He looked at Ava, sleeping again, peaceful now. But she doesn't work for me. She doesn't even know the details. Maybe she overheard something, Ruiz said. Maybe she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Elena thought back to the hotel. Fancy, quiet, the kind of place where powerful people met in private. What if she was there for an art show? She said suddenly. Lots of galleries host private viewings in hotel ballrooms. Maybe she was invited. Maybe she saw or heard something she wasn't supposed to. Jonathan's eyes widened. There was a Viridian partner event at the Grand Meridian last night. Closed door. Only 50 people. I wasn't there. I sent my COO. He pulled out his phone, scrolled fast. Ava's best friend from college works for a nonprofit that partners with us on youth programs. What if she got her a ticket? As a peace offering? To see me, to talk? The idea made sense. Painful but possible. A daughter reaching out in the only way she knew how, through work, through art, through a shared cause. And walking straight into danger. That evening, Ava opened her eyes, not just fluttered, opened. Clear, aware, scared, Dad? She whispered, voice hoarse. Jonathan nearly fell out of his chair getting to her. I'm here. I'm right here. She tried to sit up, panicked. Where am I? You're safe, Elena said, stepping forward gently. You're in the hospital. You collapsed outside a hotel. Do you remember anything? Ava's breathing quickened. She looked around wildly. Hey, he gave me a drink, said it was to celebrate. I started feeling weird. Then everything went black. Who gave you the drink? Ruiz asked from the doorway, having been alerted the moment Ava woke. Ava shook her head, tears welling. I don't know his name. He said he admired my work, that he'd seen my mural downtown. He knew about the youth center. Said he wanted to donate. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He used her kindness against her. Ava looked at her father, really looked at him for the first time in years. And in that look, Elena saw it, the wall cracking. Not gone, not yet, but cracking. I didn't know you'd be here, Ava said quietly. I'd always come, Jonathan replied, voice thick. Even when you didn't want me to. Silence filled the room, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't said for 2 years. Later, after Ruiz took Ava's statement and left to follow up on the donor lead, Elena stayed behind to check Ava's IV. As she adjusted the line, Ava caught her wrist gently. Thank you, she said. For calling him, Elena smiled. I just did what anyone would do. No, Ava said. Most people would have seen a rich girl in a torn dress and assumed the worst. You saw a person. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she just squeezed Ava's hand and said, rest now. You're safe. Outside the room, Jonathan stood with his back against the wall, eyes closed, tears finally spilling over. He didn't wipe them away. Elena walked up beside him. She's strong. She always was, he said. I just forgot to look. They stood there together in the quiet hallway, two strangers bound by one broken girl who was slowly putting herself back together, and somewhere out there, a man who thought he could use her as a pawn was about to learn a hard truth. Mess with the daughter and you wake the father. But more than that, you awaken a nurse who won't let the truth stay buried in a young woman who's done being invisible. The storm wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time there was light, faint, flickering, but real. Ava stayed in the hospital for 5 more days. Not because she was critically ill, her body was healing fast, but because the doctors wanted to watch her. The sedative had left her dizzy, her memory foggy in patches, and she startled at loud noises. More than that, no one wanted to send her back out into the world until they were sure whoever had done this wouldn't try again. Jonathan didn't leave. Not once. He slept in the stiff-backed chair beside her bed, wrapped in the thin hospital blanket Elena had given him. He ordered meals from the cafeteria, ate them slowly, and always made sure Ava had something she liked, soup, toast, fruit, before he touched his own plate. He didn't talk much about business or money. Instead, he asked her about her art, about the kids she taught, about the mural she'd painted on the side of a community center in Brooklyn, the one with the sunflowers and the quote from Maya Angelou. Ava answered quietly at first, guarded, like she was testing whether this version of her father was real or just a performance. But slowly the walls came down. Not all at once. Just brick by brick, word by word. Elena checked on them every shift. She wasn't assigned to Ava's case anymore. Her condition was stable, no longer trauma, but she kept coming by. Partly because she cared, partly because she couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. One afternoon, she found Jonathan alone in the hallway, staring at his phone with a deep frown. Everything okay? She asked. He looked up, startled. I just got the final bank report. They traced the withdrawal. It wasn't just the savings account. Someone accessed a small trust fund I set up for her when she turned 18. She never touched it before. But yesterday they transferred the whole thing, $48,000, into a crypto wallet. Gone in minutes. Elena's stomach dropped. That's not just theft. That's planning. Exactly, he said, voice low. Whoever did this knew about the trust. Knew she'd have access. Knew how to make it look like she did it herself. But why go through all that trouble? Elena asked. If they just wanted to hurt you, why not kidnap her? Threaten her? Jonathan shook his head. Because this was cleaner. If she'd disappeared, I'd move heaven and earth to find her. But if she looked like she'd run off, drained her accounts, vanished, they'd think she was just another rich kid spiraling. No police priority. No headlines, just gone. The cruelty of it hung in the air between them. Inside the room, Ava was sitting up, sketching in a small notebook a nurse had brought her. When Elena peeked in, she saw the drawing, a man's face half in shadow holding a champagne flute. Her hand was steady, but her eyes were distant. She's trying to remember, Elena said softly. She's trying to fight back, Jonathan replied. Later that day, Detective Ruiz returned with news. The man from the hotel, his name was Daniel Reeves, had been identified, not through facial recognition, but because he'd used a corporate credit card to pay for the private room at the Grand Meridian. The card belonged to a shell company, but it traced back to a tech firm called Nexora Systems. Jonathan went still. Nexora? They're one of our biggest competitors. They've been trying to block our AI ethics platform for months. They claim they had no idea Reeves was using their card, Ruiz said. Said he was a freelance consultant. But here's the thing. He doesn't exist. No social security number. No real address. No past employment that checks out. A ghost, Jonathan muttered. But Ava's sketch matches a man seen at 2 other Viridian-related events in the last 6 months. Ruiz continued, always in the background, always watching. Elena felt a chill. This wasn't random. This was targeted. That night, after her shift ended, Elena didn't go home right away. She sat in the hospital chapel, a small, quiet room with wooden benches and soft light, and thought. She'd been a nurse long enough to know that hospitals weren't just places for broken bones and fevers. They were places where lives cracked open, where truth surfaced, where people finally stopped running. And Ava wasn't just a victim. She was a witness, maybe even a key. The next morning, Elena brought Ava a fresh notebook and a set of colored pencils. Thought you might want to keep working, she said. Ava smiled faintly. Thanks, it helps. When I draw, the fog lifts a little. They sat in silence for a while. Then Ava looked up. You didn't have to keep coming back. You're not even my nurse anymore. I know, Elena said. But I saw you on that sidewalk. And I saw your dad when he walked in here. And I just wanted to make sure you both made it through. Ava's eyes filled. I thought no one would care. I thought if I disappeared, it wouldn't matter to anyone but my students. It matters, Elena said firmly. It always matters. That afternoon, Jonathan made a quiet call. Not to his lawyers, not to the press, but to the hospital administration. By evening, a check had been deposited. Anonymous, they said, but everyone knew. It was enough to fully renovate the ER's trauma wing, upgrade the monitoring systems, and fund a new program for training staff on identifying signs of drugging or coercion in young adults. When the hospital director thanked him, Jonathan just said, Tell Nurse Elena she's the reason. Elena heard about it from a colleague. She didn't say much, just nodded, touched, and went back to work. But something had shifted. Between her and Jonathan. Between him and Ava. Even between Ava and the world. Ava started talking more. Not just about what happened, but about her life. She told Elena about the art center where she taught. How the kids called her Miss A. How one little girl had painted her first self-portrait after Ava told her, You're allowed to take up space. She told her father about the nights she cried after their fight, how she missed him at her first gallery showing, how she kept a photo of them from her 10th birthday, the last time they'd gone fishing together, taped inside her sketchbook. Jonathan listened, really listened, and for the first time in years he didn't try to fix it. He just said, I'm sorry, and I'm here now. Meanwhile, the police dug deeper. They found that the crypto wallet used to drain Ava's accounts had been accessed from a server in Eastern Europe. But the initial login came from a laptop rented in Chicago, under a fake ID. The trail was messy, but it pointed to professional help. Someone who knew how to cover their tracks. Ruiz warned them. This isn't over. They'll know she's talking. They'll know we're close. Jonathan hired discreet security, no uniforms, no obvious guards. Just 2 calm, observant people who blended in, stationed near Ava's room and later outside the hospital. But he also did something else. He sat down with Ava and asked, What do you want to do? She didn't hesitate. I want to tell the truth. Not just to the police, to people, so no one else gets used like this. He nodded. Then we'll do it right, safely, on your terms. Elena watched all this unfold like a quiet storm, powerful but not loud. She saw how Ava's hands stopped shaking, how Jonathan's shoulders lost their constant tension, how the space between them filled with something real again. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and purple over the city, Elena found Ava standing by the window in her hospital gown, looking out. You're going to be okay, Elena said, joining her. Ava nodded. I think so. Not because of the money or the security, but because I finally said what happened, and someone believed me. That's all anyone really needs, Elena said softly. They stood there in silence, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Later, Jonathan approached Elena in the hallway. He looked tired but calm. I never thanked you properly, he said, for calling me, for seeing her as a person, not a problem. You would have done the same, she replied. Maybe, he said, but you did it first. He paused, then added, there's a community art program in the South Side that's been struggling for funding. Ava mentioned it once. I'm going to support it. Fully, but I want to name it after someone who actually deserves it. Elena shook her head. Don't do that. I just did my job. You did more than that, he said. You reminded me what matters. She didn't argue. She just smiled and said, then make sure those kids get real paint, not the cheap stuff that cracks. He laughed, a real laugh, the first she'd heard from him. Noted. As the days passed, Ava grew stronger. She walked the halls with a nurse beside her, then alone. She ate full meals. She even joked with the staff. And every evening, she and her father sat together, not talking about the past or the future, just being in the same room, breathing the same air. Elena knew her part in this story was winding down. Ava would be discharged soon. Life would move on. But she also knew something had changed, not just for them, but for her too. She'd spent years believing that in the ER, you patched people up and sent them back out, hoping they'd be okay. But this time she'd stayed. She'd seen the whole picture, and it reminded her why she'd become a nurse in the first place, not to fix bodies, but to honor people. One night as she was leaving, she passed Ava's room. The door was open a crack. Inside, Jonathan was reading aloud from an old book, Ava's favorite as a child. His voice was soft, steady. Ava was half asleep, smiling. Elena didn't go in. She just stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet rhythm of healing, and then walked away, heart full. The danger wasn't gone. The investigation wasn't over. But in that room, something precious had been rebuilt, and sometimes that was enough to keep going. Because in the end, it wasn't about billions or headlines or even justice, though those mattered. It was about a father and daughter finding their way back to each other, and a nurse who refused to look away, and that, Elena thought as she stepped out into the cool night air, was a story worth telling. Ava was discharged from the hospital on a crisp Thursday morning, the kind where the air smells like fallen leaves and fresh coffee. She wore jeans and a soft sweater Jonathan had brought from a nearby store. Nothing fancy, just comfortable. No heels, no designer labels. Just clothes that let her move, breathe, feel like herself again. Elena walked her to the exit, clipboard in hand, though she didn't need it. She just wanted to see her off. You'll follow up with your doctor in Brooklyn? Elena asked, already knowing the answer. I will, Ava said, and I'll keep drawing. It helps. I believe that, Elena said, smiling. Art's not just pretty pictures. It's how some people speak when words fail. Ava hugged her then, quick, warm, real. Thank you for seeing me. I'll always see you, Elena said softly. Outside, a black sedan waited, windows tinted, driver standing respectfully by the door. Not flashy, just safe. Jonathan stood beside it, holding a travel mug of tea, Ava's favorite, chamomile with honey. He didn't say much, just nodded at Elena, eyes full of quiet gratitude. As the car pulled away, Elena watched until it disappeared around the corner. Then she turned back toward the ER, already hearing the familiar beep of a monitor, the call over the intercom for a trauma team. Life didn't pause for miracles. It just kept going, and so did she. But things weren't quiet for long. 2 days later, Detective Ruiz called Elena at the hospital. We got a break, she said. Reeves, the man from the hotel, used a fake ID to rent that laptop, but he slipped up. Left a fingerprint on the rental agreement. It matched a guy named Leo Varga, former security contractor, fired from a private firm 2 years ago for ethical violations. Turns out he's been doing off-the-books work for Nexora ever since. Elena's pulse quickened. So it's confirmed? They sent him. Not officially, Ruiz said. Nexora's CEO is denying everything. Says Varga was a rogue actor, but we found emails, encrypted but recoverable. They show Nexora's head of strategy asking Varga to disrupt Viridian's public image before the AI ethics launch. And they specifically mentioned Ava. Why her? Elena asked. Because she was the perfect target, Ruiz said. Disconnected from her father, living quietly, no media presence. If she vanished or got into trouble, it would look like personal failure, not corporate sabotage. And if she overheard something at that event, well, silencing her was cleaner than a lawsuit. Elena felt sick. It wasn't just greed. It was calculation. Cold, precise, cruel. Meanwhile, Ava was back in Brooklyn, but not hiding. She'd moved temporarily into a secure apartment Jonathan had arranged. Not a penthouse, just a quiet place with good locks and a view of the park. She spent her mornings teaching art to kids at the community center, afternoons meeting with Ruiz and a victim advocate, and evenings talking with her father on the phone. Not about business. About books. About music. About the stray cat that kept showing up on her fire escape. One afternoon, she sat down with a journalist. Not from a tabloid, but from a respected tech ethics newsletter. She told her story plainly. How she'd been invited to the Viridian Partner event by a friend who worked with youth programs. How she'd hoped to see her father from a distance. Maybe leave a note how a man approached her, charmed her with knowledge of her work, and then the drink, the darkness, the fear. She didn't exaggerate, didn't dramatize, just spoke the truth, calmly, clearly. The article went live on a Tuesday. By Wednesday it was everywhere, not because it was sensational, but because it was real. People shared it not for the billionaire angle, but for the warning. This could happen to anyone. A young woman, trusting, kind, doing good work, and targeted because she was vulnerable. Nexora's stock dropped 12% in a day. Their CEO issued a statement calling the allegations baseless, but internal emails leaked soon after, showing direct orders to neutralize potential leaks around Viridian's platform. The Department of Justice opened an investigation. Varga was arrested in a motel outside Detroit, trying to cross into Canada with a fake passport and $200,000 in cash. Justice, it seemed, was finally moving. But for Ava, the real victory wasn't in headlines or arrests. It was in the messages that started flooding her inbox. From a college student, "I was drugged at a party last year. No one believed me. Thank you for speaking up." From a teacher, "My student read your story and finally told us what happened to her. You gave her courage." From a nurse in Ohio, "I work nights like you. I saw myself in your words. Keep going." She printed them, taped them to her wall next to her sketches. Jonathan read every one. And for the first time in years, he didn't reach for his phone to call his lawyers or his PR team. He called his daughter. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. Ava cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. From being seen, not as a victim, not as a billionaire's child, but as a person who chose to stand up. Back in Chicago, Elena saw the article too. A colleague printed it out and left it on her desk with a sticky note. "You started this." She didn't agree. Ava had done the hard part. But she did feel a quiet warmth in her chest. Sometimes one phone call really could change everything. Then came the unexpected. A week after the article, Jonathan showed up at County General, not in a suit, not with an entourage, but in a plain coat, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He found Elena during her break in the staff lounge. "I didn't come to thank you again," he said, handing her a cup. "I came to ask for help." She raised an eyebrow. "With what?" "The hospital's trauma wing is getting upgraded thanks to the donation," he said. "But I've been talking to Ava, and she said something that stuck with me. She said the scariest part wasn't the drugs or the collapse, it was waking up alone, not knowing who to trust." Elena nodded. "That's common, especially with drugging cases. The mind feels violated even if the body wasn't." "Exactly," he said. "So I want to fund a new training module for ER staff. How to spot signs of covert drugging, how to talk to patients without making them feel judged, how to preserve evidence while still offering comfort. But I don't want it to be some corporate brochure. I want it to be real, human." He looked at her. "Will you help design it?" Elena was quiet for a moment. She thought of all the young people who'd come through those doors, scared, confused, ashamed, and how often they'd been dismissed as just drunk or dramatic. She thought of Ava, barefoot on the sidewalk, and how easily it could have gone the other way. "Yes," she said, "but only if Ava helps too. She's the one who lived it." Jonathan smiled. "Already asked her." She said yes. Over the next few weeks, the 3 of them met, sometimes in person, sometimes over video calls. Ava shared what it felt like to wake up disoriented, what words made her feel safe. "You're okay, I believe you." What made her shut down? What were you thinking? "Why'd you go with him?" Elena added medical insight, how certain drugs mimic alcohol, how memory gaps don't mean someone's lying, how trauma shows up in the body long after the event. Jonathan handled the logistics, the funding. the hospital partnerships, but stayed in the background, letting their voices lead. The program was called See the Person, a simple phrase that carried so much weight. It launched quietly at first, just in Chicago, but within months other hospitals asked for it. Then nursing schools, then a National Trauma Association endorsed it. No one called it the Billionaire's Project. They called it Elena and Ava's Guide. And through it all, the bond between father and daughter deepened. Jonathan started visiting Brooklyn, not for board meetings, but to sit in on Ava's art class, to eat dumplings at her favorite spot, to walk the park with her and that stray cat, now officially named Sonny. He even started painting himself, badly, he admitted. But Ava said it didn't matter. It's not about being good, she told him. It's about showing up. One evening, as they sat on her fire escape watching the sunset, Ava asked, "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Jonathan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She'd be proud of you, and she'd be glad I finally learned to listen." Back in Chicago, Elena stood in the newly renovated trauma bay, watching a new nurse gently comfort a young woman who'd been found wandering near a bus station. Confused and dehydrated, the nurse used the exact words from the training. "You're safe now. We're going to figure this out together." Elena didn't say anything. She just smiled and walked on. The world was still full of shadows. People still got hurt. Lies still spread. But now in this hospital, and soon in many others, there was a little more light. A little more care. A little more belief in the truth. And that, Elena knew, was how real change began, not with explosions or headlines, but with one person choosing to see another, really see them. Ava had woken up alone on a rainy street, but she hadn't stayed alone. And because of that, countless others wouldn't have to either. The story wasn't over, but the turning point had passed. And ahead lay not just healing, but purpose, woven together by a nurse's call, a father's regret, and a daughter's courage. 6 months had passed since that rainy night in Chicago, and spring had settled over the city like a soft blanket. Trees bloomed in pale pinks and whites, sidewalks warmed under morning sun, and the air carried the sound of kids laughing on their way to school. In a quiet neighborhood on the south side, a small building that once housed a failing laundromat now stood transformed. Fresh paint, wide windows, walls covered in bright murals of stars, books, and hands reaching toward each other. Inside, a group of teenagers dipped brushes into jars of paint, working on a new mural under the guidance of a young woman with dark hair, pulled into a loose bun and paint smudged on her sleeve. She moved calmly among them, offering quiet suggestions, laughing at a joke, helping steady a shaky line. She wasn't loud. She didn't need to be. The kids listened because they knew she saw them, not as problems or projects, but as people with stories worth telling. This was the Thorne Community Art Center, and though the name carried a famous last name, everyone who walked through the doors knew it wasn't really about that. It was about the woman who'd stood on a sidewalk, broken and alone, and the nurse who refused to look away. The grand opening had been held the week before. Not a fancy gala with champagne and speeches, but a simple gathering. Families, teachers, local artists, hospital staff, even a few police officers who'd worked the case. There were tables with snacks, kids showing off their artwork, and a small stage where a group of students performed spoken word pieces about hope, fear, and finding your voice. And in the center of it all, standing slightly off to the side, was Jonathan. He wore a simple button-down shirt, no tie, and watched his daughter with an expression that was hard to describe. Proud, yes, but also peaceful. Like he'd finally stopped running from something he couldn't outrun, his own heart. Elena was there too. She'd taken the day off, something she rarely did, and stood near the back, arms crossed, smiling as she watched a little girl proudly show her mother a painting of a sunflower. She didn't expect to be noticed, but Ava spotted her right away and came over, pulling her into a hug. "You came," Ava said, eyes shining. "Of course I did," Elena replied. "I wouldn't miss this." Ava glanced around the room, at the kids painting, the parents chatting, the light streaming through the windows. "It feels real, doesn't it? Not like a charity stunt, just real." "It is real," Elena said, "because you made it that way." Later, during a quiet moment, Jonathan approached Elena. He didn't offer money or grand gestures. He just handed her a small framed photo. It showed the three of them, Elena, Ava, and him, standing outside the hospital on the day Ava was discharged. They looked tired but together. "I had it printed," he said. "For you, to remember that sometimes the smallest choices change everything." Elena took it, touched. "I don't need a reminder." "But thank you," he nodded. "Ava told me something last night. She said the reason she's not afraid anymore isn't because the bad guy's in jail or because she's safe now. It's because she knows someone will always believe her." Elena looked at him. That's the best kind of safety there is. Life hadn't magically fixed itself after that night. Healing wasn't a straight line. There were still days when Ava woke up with her heart racing, convinced someone was watching. Days when Jonathan second-guessed every decision, wondering if he could have protected her sooner. And days when Elena walked into the ER and saw a young woman alone on a gurney, and her chest tightened with memory. But they'd learned to carry it differently. Ava still lived in Brooklyn, but she visited Chicago often, not just to see her father, but to work with the hospital's new training program. She'd sit with nurses, share her story, answer their questions, not as a victim, but as a teacher. She'd even started a podcast with other survivors talking about trust, recovery, and how to rebuild after betrayal. Jonathan, for his part, had stepped back from the day-to-day of his company. He hadn't retired, far from it, but he'd handed over the CEO role to someone he trusted and taken on a new title, Head of Ethical Impact. He used his influence not to crush competitors, but to push for laws that protected whistleblowers, funded mental health in schools, and supported community art programs nationwide. And Elena, she'd been promoted, not to administration, but to a new role she helped create, Trauma Outreach Coordinator. Her job was to bridge the gap between the ER and the community, to make sure people knew where to go when they were hurting, and that when they got there, they'd be met with kindness, not judgment. She'd also started a support group for ER staff who'd been through tough cases, because she'd learned that caregivers needed healing too. One afternoon, a few weeks after the center's opening, Elena sat in her office going over training materials when there was a knock on the door. It was a young nurse she'd mentored holding a file. "We just admitted a girl," the nurse said quietly, 18. "Found outside a club, confused, dehydrated. No ID, but she's clutching a sketchbook." Elena's breath caught. For a split second, she was back on that rainy night. "Is she talking?" Elena asked, a little. "She keeps saying, 'I didn't do anything wrong.'" Elena stood up, grabbed her stethoscope, and headed for the ER. "Let's go see her." When they reached the room, the girl was sitting up, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide with fear. But when Elena walked in, she didn't reach for charts or ask rapid-fire questions. She pulled up a chair, sat at eye level, and said gently, "Hey, I'm Elena. You're safe here." The girl blinked. You believe me?" "I do," Elena said. "And we're going to figure this out together." Later, after the girl was settled and her family contacted, Elena stepped outside for air. The sun was warm on her face. In the distance, she could see the outline of the new arts center, its mural glowing in the afternoon light. She thought about how stories like this didn't end with a neat bow. There was no happily ever after in real life, just moments of courage, choices to care, and the slow, steady work of rebuilding. But that was enough. Because in that hospital, in that community center, in quiet conversations between strangers who became allies, something powerful was growing. Not fame, not fortune, but trust. And trust, Elena knew, was the rarest and most valuable thing of all. Ava had once said that art wasn't about making things pretty. It was about making truth visible. And maybe that's what they'd all done in their own way, made the truth visible, that no one should be left alone on a sidewalk, that every person deserves to be seen. That healing begins when someone says, "I believe you." Back inside, Elena returned to her rounds. There was always another patient, another story, another chance to get it right. And as she walked down the hall, the beep of monitors and murmur of voices surrounding her, she felt it, not the weight of the past, but the quiet strength of what they'd built together. A billionaire, a nurse, a daughter who refused to disappear. They hadn't changed the world in a single night, but they'd changed each other. And sometimes that was how the world changed too. One act of courage, one phone call, one moment of seeing someone for who they really were. And that was a story worth living. Of course, Since your original request was for a 5-part story, and all 5 parts have now been written and completed, there is no official Part 6 in the outline. However, if you're asking for a bonus 6th part hour as a continuation, something that shows the lasting ripple of the story, I'm happy to provide it as a special edition. Below is Part 6 No, written in the same style, 2,200 words. Simple English, natural tone, human-centered, YouTube-safe, and without common AI-sounding phrases or restricted names. It had been over a year since that rainy night in Chicago, and life had settled into a new kind of rhythm, one that wasn't perfect but felt honest. The kind of rhythm where healing wasn't a destination but a daily choice. Ava no longer jumped at sudden noises. She still kept her apartment door double-locked, but now it was more habit than fear. She taught art 3 days a week at the South Side Center, and on weekends, she traveled to other cities, Detroit, Atlanta, Portland, helping launch similar programs in partnership with local hospitals and schools. She never called them trauma centers or recovery spaces. She just called them places to be seen. One cool October morning, she stood in a converted warehouse in Cleveland, watching a group of teenagers paint a mural that stretched across an entire wall. It showed a city skyline made of hands, some small, some wrinkled, some holding paintbrushes, others holding stethoscopes or books. At the center was a phone, old-fashioned, with the receiver off the hook. "That's for the call that changed everything," one of the students told her shyly. Ava smiled. "Yeah," she said. "Sometimes one voice is all it takes." She didn't talk about her father much on these trips, not because she was ashamed of the wealth, but because she wanted people to see her for what she did, not who she came from. Still, his support was always there, quiet, steady, never demanding credit. He'd funded the national rollout of the See the Person training program, but insisted the materials carry only Elena's name and the names of the survivors who helped shape them. Back in Chicago, Elena had just finished leading a workshop for new ER nurses. She stood in the hospital courtyard during her break, sipping tea from a chipped mug, watching sparrows hop between benches. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ava. "Cleveland kids just asked if you'd come speak next month. They've heard your name like you're a legend." Elena chuckled and typed back, "Tell them I'm just a nurse who answers the phone." She meant it. Fame had never been the point. But something had shifted in the culture of the ER since that night. Nurses now asked different questions. Doctors listened longer. Security staff were trained to spot signs of coercion, not just violence. And when a young person came in confused or scared, the first words were no longer, "What did you take?" but "What happened to you?" It wasn't perfect. Systems were slow to change. But the shift was real. Later that week, Elena received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her early 20s, dressed in scrubs that were slightly too big, stood nervously at the nurse's station. "I'm looking for Nurse Elena," she said, voice soft. Elena turned from the chart she was reviewing. "That's me." The young woman took a breath. "My name is Leah. I was in the ER last spring. You were the one who stayed with me after I was found near the bus station. I didn't remember much, but I remember your voice." Elena's eyes widened. She did remember. A quiet girl, disoriented, with traces of the same sedative Ava had been given. They'd never found who did it. The case had gone cold. "I'm in nursing school now," Leah said, holding up a folder. "I start clinicals next month. And I wanted to thank you. You didn't treat me like a problem. You treated me like I mattered." Elena felt a lump in her throat. She stepped out from behind the desk and hugged the young woman. "You do matter, and the world needs nurses like you. Ones who know what it feels like to be on the other side." Leah smiled through tears. "I want to help build the kind of place you made for me." That moment stayed with Elena all day. It reminded her that healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about passing on the light. Meanwhile, Jonathan had taken on a quieter role in the world. He still sat on Viridian's board, but he spent most of his time mentoring young entrepreneurs from underfunded communities, especially women in tech and the arts. He never led with his wallet. He led with questions. "What do you need? How can I listen better?" One afternoon, he visited Ava in Brooklyn. She was working on a new series of paintings, abstract pieces that used layers of color to show how memory works after trauma. Some parts sharp, some blurred, all connected. He sat on the floor beside her, watching her mix blues and grays into something that looked like dawn breaking through storm clouds. "You've gotten so good," he said. She laughed. "Or I've just stopped caring if it's good. I care if it's true." He nodded. That was the lesson he'd learned too. Success wasn't about control. It was about connection. Later, over takeout dumplings, Ava asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Nurse Elena hadn't called?" Jonathan was quiet for a long time. "I don't like to go there," he finally said. "But I do know this. Because she did, I got a second chance. And you got to keep living your life, not as a headline, but as yourself." Ava reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We both got more than a second chance, Dad. We got a real beginning." Back in Chicago, the Arts Center had become a neighborhood anchor. After school, kids flooded in, not just to paint but to do homework, talk to counselors, or just sit in a safe space. Local artists held workshops. Retired teachers volunteered as tutors. Even police officers from the community liaison unit stopped by, not in uniform, just to say hello. Elena visited often. She didn't teach or lead. She just showed up, sometimes bringing snacks, sometimes just sitting in the back watching. One day, a little girl named Maya tugged on her sleeve. "Are you the nurse who saved Miss Ava?" she asked, eyes wide. Elena knelt down. "I didn't save her. She saved herself. I just helped her feel safe enough to try." Maya thought about that. Then she handed Elena a drawing, a woman with a stethoscope and wings, holding a phone in one hand and a paintbrush in the other. "For you," she said. Elena pinned it to her office wall the next day, right next to the photo from the hospital. As the year turned toward winter, something unexpected happened. The See the Person training program was adopted by a national coalition of trauma centers. Hospitals from coast to coast began using it, and with it came stories, dozens, then hundreds of cases where early recognition of drugging or coercion led to faster help, better evidence collection, and in some cases, stopping predators before they struck again. Elena was invited to speak at a medical conference in Washington, D.C. She almost said no. She hated the spotlight, but Ava convinced her. "Not for you," Ava said. "For the next Leah. The next girl who wakes up alone and scared. They need to know someone's listening." So Elena went. She didn't wear a fancy suit, just her usual scrubs and a sweater. And when she spoke, she didn't talk about protocols or policies. She talked about a rainy night, a barefoot girl, a phone call made out of instinct, not policy, and how one moment of human decency can echo further than anyone expects. After her talk, a man in the audience approached her. He was in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle voice. "My daughter went through something similar 10 years ago," he said. No one believed her. She carried that silence for years. But after reading about your work, she finally told her story. She's in therapy now, healing. He paused, tears in his eyes. "Thank you for giving her permission to be heard." Elena didn't know what to say, so she just took his hand and said, "Thank you for listening to her." On the flight home, she looked out the window at the clouds below and thought about how small acts, answering a phone, staying by a bedside, believing someone when they say they're hurting, could stitch the world back together, one thread at a time. That weekend, Ava came to Chicago for a special event, the 1-year anniversary of the Arts Center. They didn't throw a party. Instead, they held an open studio day. Anyone in the neighborhood could come paint, write, or just sit and talk. Elena arrived early to help set up. She found Jonathan already there, carefully hanging a new mural Ava had painted just for the occasion. It showed 3 figures, one in scrubs holding a phone, one in a sweater holding a hand, and one with a paintbrush reaching toward the sky. Above them, in delicate script, were the words, "You are not alone." Ava walked in moments later, carrying trays of pastries from her favorite Brooklyn bakery. She saw the mural and stopped dead. "You hung it," she whispered. Jonathan nodded. "It's the truest thing I've ever seen." As the day went on, the center filled with laughter, music, and the smell of fresh paint. Kids ran between easels. Parents chatted over coffee. Elena sat at a small table with Leah, now in her first clinical rotation, going over patient scenarios. And in the corner, Jonathan and Ava painted together, side by side, not speaking much, just sharing the quiet joy of creating something beautiful out of what had once been broken. Later, as the sun set and the last guests left, the 3 of them stood in the empty center, surrounded by art, light, and the echoes of 100 voices that had found safety within these walls. No one said much. They didn't need to, because the story wasn't about a billionaire, a nurse, or a daughter anymore. It was about what happens when people choose to care, really care, when it's easier not to. When they see each other not as roles or labels, but as human beings worthy of dignity, belief, and a second chance. And in a world that often feels cold and loud, that choice, simple, quiet, relentless, was the most powerful thing of all. Elena locked up the center that night, keys in hand, and walked toward the bus stop. The air was crisp, the streetlights just starting to glow. Somewhere in the city, another phone might ring. Another person might fall. Another nurse might answer. And because of what they'd built together, that person wouldn't be alone. That was enough. More than enough, it was everything.